Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Carnivore Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with the esteemed Dr. Eric Lopkin, and a reoccurring guest that both Eric and I really appreciate and love is Keith Reynolds. And why it's so good is because we try to aim, which I think is a diminishing commodity nowadays, for kind of an intellectual discussion. And I hope we'll accomplish this today with the help of our listeners. And that's all about, you know, and Keith and I actually worked during the time when the internet was being launched, dating ourselves, but what can I tell you? And it had all this promise of being the exchange, a free exchange of ideas and an opening up of the knowledge base and, the formulating of the convergence of divergent opinions. 30 years later, and I'm going to throw it out to Keith, our guest first, it's been anything but that. And there's a lot of food for thought. So it's a big topic, and we got to digest it bite by bite.
Yeah, and it's a horror show right now. We've gone from an environment where we had few media channels and we all had different ideas, but they were there was an exchange of ideas and a limited amount of knowledge and information being shared. So now we've got a ton of it, and you can just segregate yourself off into a corner and never look at the. No,
I love what you just said. I'm not sorry to interrupt, but that's brilliant. Is you had unlimited knowledge base, so to speak, but a huge opening up of ideas and exchange of opinions. Now it's the reverse. You know, you have an infinite number of ideas, opinions, but yet people have become more narrow-minded. Dr. Eric Lopkin, comment on this opening exchange.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what's happened. I mean, when we had the limited media options, when an idea came across, the 6 o'clock news or the morning newspaper, it was facts were being presented by people who, 1, investigated them, 2, fact-checked them, 3, edited them. So by the time the information got to the general public, it was verified, it was real, they knew what they were talking about. When the internet gave everybody a voice, all of that went away. So there is no editorial control, there is no investigation. It's just people spouting information. People, I heard it on the internet, it must be true, when you don't even know who's saying half the time.
No,
yeah,
I
the information's
like that,
out
but
there.
I also thought, just real quick before I throw it out to Keith, is that I love when we were on terrestrial radio, Dr. Lopkin, is your whole, maybe you can kind of comment on that before we throw it out to Keith Reynolds, is that we have an echo chamber now because, yes, we have, like Keith said, and it was brilliant, we have infinite amount of knowledge out. Infinite. I mean, you could Google, you can search, you can go on social forever. Spend your entire life doing that. Unlike, 60 years ago, you'd have to have the New York Times or the Hartford Courant when it's actually a newspaper. But now, Dr. Lopkin, as you said 20 years ago, if you're conservative, you're going to Fox, and that's just going to reinforce what you already believe. And that's why no one talks to each other. And it's actually, at first it was kind of amusing when you first came up with this theory. It's not so amusing anymore, 10, 15 years later, because people aren't talking to each other, and it's actually, we've become a fractured society that's bordering on the verge of being ungovernable.
Yeah, I mean, originally, newspapers, a lot of them were run by foundations or they were part of another, so you had to bring in enough money to support themselves, and that was about it. News operations in networks were generally considered loss leaders, so they didn't worry about that. They just focused on the news. As we started rolling out things like CNN, like Fox News, 24-hour news channels, these suddenly had to turn a profit. Well, how do you turn a profit? You say what your audience wants to hear. So they picked their sides. You know, MSNBC and CNN went liberal, Fox went conservative, and they presented the news as it was most compatible with their audience. And that started that echo chamber. So if you believed what Fox was saying or you believed what CNN was saying, then you naturally went to them because, quite frankly, that's how people are wired. They want to be around folks that agree with them. But it spiraled, so you had that echo chamber, and it just kept getting worse and worse to now I've spoken to Democrats and liberals who have had their facts wrong, but because it came from their source, they refuse to believe anything else. And I've spoken to conservatives and right-wing folks that, you know, their idea was wrong, but because it came from Fox or Newsmax or wherever, they refuse to believe the other side.
Yeah, and real quick before we throw it out to Keith, is that it's also been, I've actually been a part of it. I've experienced this, that, like, forget about, like, someone you don't even know, have no vested interest, a friendship or a relationship in, but it's with family members, good friends that you used to, it used to be the whole, it was Americana. You know, at the Thanksgiving Day or Christmas table, you would have an exchange of ideas. It might get a little heated, but it was all good. Now people are losing friendships, losing relationships over this, Mr. Reynolds.
Well, yeah, you layer on top of this polarized traditional media, the internet, and the scale and anonymity that people have, well, the scale of the conversation and the anonymity that people have that makes the lie acceptable. And now you mix in taking that traditional media, helping to spread the lie, and then throw it into the echo chamber, and you end up with, you know, what we had on January 6th, where an entire group of people show up in a violent mob. It is.
Yeah, I wonder if
really
that's not
scary.
a precursor, Keith. I wonder if that's not, and then we'll throw it out to Dr. That's not a precursor for, that's something we used to look at, you know, or I used to look at as a kid. It was on, you know, the evening news, and it would be in Guatemala or El Salvador. It's in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, well, I think we have a free market response today, a $1.6 billion suit against Fox News. It's not going to take too many of those to rein in that kind of behavior from the networks.
Let's see. Dr. Lopkin, what do you think of that?
Yeah,
it's kind of something we saw as kids. I know, you know, you're younger than me, but within the same kind of generation, you'd see that, you know, in Walter Cronkite or, you know, Chet Huntley, and it'd be, you know, it'd be something in some third world country. I mean, you forget about who's to blame. That's got to be an outgrowth of the echo chamber. You don't get people so radicalized just for yucks. And it's not just conservatives. I think, you know, 3 years from now, it could be on the liberal side. I don't know.
Well, remember, on Inauguration Day when Trump was sworn into office, there was violence in Washington, D.C. That had never happened before. So it is on both sides. And, yeah, it's partially the echo chamber. And, you know, Keith mentioned the lawsuit against Fox News. There's also a lawsuit against the New York Times for slander that the New York Supreme Court, the New York Times had actually filed to have the motion for dismissal to have the case dismissed. And the New York Supreme Court said, no, there's a case here, it can go on. So I'm actually hoping that some of these court cases will start to rein in these media outlets and bring them back to the point they remember they have to act responsibly.
And that's also kind of to Keith's point, correct, Mr. Reynolds, that maybe this kind of be, because it's not in America's interest. You cannot function as a democracy with this type of behavior. Yeah,
I mean, we threw out the regulatory approach with the fair use.
The fair doctrine.
Dr. Lopkin talks a lot about that, yes. Yeah, we threw that out in 1985 or whatever that was, 1986. And it's just grown and grown, and it's, metastasized into what we have. And it's very interesting to see the courts, how they're going to handle it now that it's, turned into a lawsuit, because we need some sort of restraint here. We can't just keep going like this. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Lopkin.
Part of the problem, going back to when the fairness doctrine was repealed, was when people had broadcast, and there were very specific regulations that regulated broadcast. You could not own a newspaper and a television station in the same market. That's gone away. But originally, the whole idea was of scarcity. The airwaves were a public resource, and you had to prove that you were using them responsibly. As we went to cable networks that didn't use the airwaves, they broadcast over, lines that they laid down. As we went to the internet, the government lost that ability to say this is a public resource. And I hate to say that the internet needs to be regulated as a public resource, because the government has a long history of doing that badly. But we need to look at different ways to say, hey, you know what? We've got to be a little more responsible with information.
It's funny that you say that, Dr. Lopkin, because I remember, again, being a little nostalgic. I remember it kind of as a kid or whatever. I didn't even like it because it interfered with the Three Stooges or something, but they'd have Channel 30 and they'd say, we're renewing our license. And, I guess they had to do this as part. You can call the FCC. You can do, and like you said, both of you said, that was part of the contract that, you're a for-profit organization. You're not philanthropic, but you have a responsibility, and there's limited amount of space, but that's all gone. And, and you could, with a nice website, you can look like the New York Times.
That's right.
Exactly.
Are we up against a break, Dr. Lopkin?
We do have a break coming up, so we will be right back.
To reach the next level, you need to operate at peak performance. The key to this is mastering the 7 elements of success. Learn how to master mindset, focus, operations, communications, innovation, evaluation metrics, and continuous improvement. Get the Biznetics way at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and bookstores near you.
And we're back. And if you'd like to be part of this conversation, you can call in at 563-999-3693. That's 563-999-3693.
Dr. Lopkin and Mr. Reynolds, let's move on a little bit, and I think this is an outgrowth of what we just talked about. And by the way, the first segment was awesome, as I expected. Cancel culture, isn't it the outgrowth of what exactly we've outlined in the initial thesis, that now we're not even talking? You just it's like a 5-year-old kid. Shut up. I'm taking my ball and I'm going home. Isn't that where we are right now? First, Dr. Lopkin.
Yes, cancel culture is a direct outgrowth of the echo chamber, because on both sides you have people that say, I know what's right, and I'm not going to allow somebody to say anything that's going to disagree with that, because I know what I'm saying is right. And unfortunately,
I think
most of the time they're not.
Not to interrupt, but I thought your point for our listeners, your ending point is amazing. It's I know what's right, and I'm not going to listen to you. That's exactly where we are, Dr. Lopkin. I'm sorry, but continue. That was amazing.
But it's more than just an I'm not going to listen to you. It's I know I'm right, so you have to listen to me and not listen to anybody else. And that's where cancel culture has gone. And it's absolutely horrific. There's bad ideas out there. The best way to combat them is to discuss them openly. And instead, they're being forced down. And you saw what happened in January, where this was a group of people who their voices were not being heard, their ideas were not being discussed openly, and they finally resorted to violence.
Excellent point. Before we throw out to Keith, I think Dr. Lopkin, as always, has a really good point, is that if your voice, and forget about it, I'm not getting into who's wrong or who's right. I mean, obviously, storming the Capitol, I mean, hello. But if your voice isn't being heard, and let's not even refer to that direct incident, but if your voice, if you don't have an outlet, maybe instead of talking, you're going to resort possibly to more violent measures. You become more radicalized. Keith?
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's violent factions on both sides of
no. It's not
divide.
One side or the other. It's just a natural outgrowth of human behavior. If you're canceled, and the first comment on what Dr. Lopkin was saying, that that now we've gotten to the point of it's my ball, I'm going home. We're not playing softball anymore.
Well, I was and just in commenting on the both sides, I also saw recently that both Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Marjorie Greene have both been settled lawsuits where they had their public websites. They tried to block dissent on their Twitter accounts, and that was declared illegal. And so they settled in court and had to pay damages to those that they blocked. There's this cancel culture. It also may have some recourse in the courts as well over time, but it's really not healthy to take a situation like what happened with the Dr. Seuss situation, where there was a 20-year contract between the NEA and Dr. Seuss's estate, that managed the assets of his estate. They had a 20-year contract that ended, and all of a sudden, because they made a change and in trying to extend the brand and make sure that it survives, there was a thoughtful process as to which of his books they were going to discontinue. It got turned into a cancel culture discussion. I mean, it's insane. It wasn't even a cancel culture
but that's the whole
issue.
thing of like with Dr. Seuss is, I think this is more of a right-wing kind of outrage, is that the facts, as you outlined, weren't available. And it happens on the left, too. But, when I initially thought, Dr. Seuss, what the heck are you doing? Like, it's like green eggs and ham. But investigating a little deeper, you're talking about their association. It was only a 20-year arrangement anyway. Yeah, I'm not, should it have happened? Yes or no? That's an open debate. But there was more to the eye. There was more to meet the eye than what is in the general vernacular or the public vernacular.
In addition to the edited factual information that is out there and is available to everybody, there's lies and opinions that people put out to serve other agendas, and that's when it gets dangerous.
Dr. Lopkin,
that's actually
I really
one
like
of the big problems.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's actually one of the big problems, is that there's so many people spouting opinions that people take as facts rather than investigating, finding out the full story.
Well, why do you have to investigate, Dr. Lopkin, facetiously, when you can just go to Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, and they're going to tell you what to think? Why would you ever? That's really, actually, in a roundabout way, haven't we kind of nailed it, gentlemen? That what back 40 years ago, the Jurassic era, you might have to go to a library. You might have to look at various news sources. Now, you can just plop on the TV, go to your favorite internet, and they're going to tell you what to think. Dr. Lopkin?
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I actually miss on the DirecTV system, there used to be a channel called Newsmix. And it was literally 6 different news channels on the screen at the same time, and you just used the cursor to flip between the audio of them. So you could see CNN, SNBC, Bloomberg, see it all talking about the same issue and get all of those different points of view and see what was going on. Now, nobody seems to be willing to look at that other channel, see what the other side is saying. They're just caught in the echo chamber.
Yes, I agree 100%. But Keith, I'm sorry, but Keith, before you go on, follow through the thought. But you're a big prognosticator. You're a big futurist. Where does this lead us? I mean, it's not that long since all this stuff happened. 20 years is a blink of the eye. I mean, could we get to a point where we're almost ungovernable? I mean, you have certain factions, and I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to cancel you, and I'm not going to talk to you. So, even in Congress, there was a time, in the 80s where Tip O'Neill and President Reagan, they were diametrically opposed politically, but yet they'd go to a pub and have a beer. There's no beer, being drank, between the Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. Your thoughts?
Well, I'd like to see us get to a day where personal responsibility and there's a certain amount of shame for putting lies out. Maybe I'm being a Pollyannish about it, but I think we have to get back to a point where, since we no longer have Walter Cronkite, we have to be our own Walter Cronkite.
Yeah, but I love what you're just saying because it's great food for thought. But isn't it, and I hate to be negative, and I'll throw out to Lopkin after this, but to your point is, aren't you actually, you're not punished for what you just said, but you're rewarded, Dr. Lopkin, to some degree, as you outlined initially in the show, financially, aren't you? I mean, is the echo chamber is going to increase your revenues because your listening base, your audience is going to expand?
Yes, the echo chamber is very profitable, and it's not just news outlets. I'm forgetting her first name, but Kamala Harris's niece on Twitter. She has a big Twitter following, and she is a social media influencer and makes money this way. And when the shooting happened in Boulder, Colorado, she made assumptions about who it was, put the tweets out, was completely wrong, and then her apology was sort of backhanded because she didn't want to really back down to her audience. She was playing to the crowd.
Oh, well, it's like in court when you say Keith Reynolds is a murderer, and then it's like we'll not allow that in court. Jury, forget that you heard. You can't forget that you heard that. I mean, that's wishful thinking, aren't we? Isn't that where we are at, Keith?
Well, Keith? Again, in that situation, Kamala Harris's was it niece?
Niece, yes.
I believe so, yeah.
That's where we need personal responsibility, and we need to have, if you go ahead and do that, your following should go follow someone else. That's really I don't know how to affect that from a policy standpoint, but that's really, in our current environment, it's lawsuits and personal responsibility and people just saying, I'm not going to follow someone who does something like what she did.
Yeah,
excellent.
That's
so
what needs to happen, but it's unfortunately it's easier said than done. We need to have that happen, but it's tough.
Put your futuristic thinking caps on first, Dr. Lopkin. Where do you think this is headed and 5 years is an eternity nowadays. 5 years from now, Dr. Lopkin.
Honestly, I don't see it getting any better over the next 5 years. We have to really find some way to incentivize people to change this system. And right now, 5 years, I don't think it's going to be all that different. I'm hoping, and it's funny because a lot of this is turning out to be generational. The millennials have, embraced cancel culture, and you're seeing more and more Gen Xers and now Gen Zers come forward and go, no, enough is enough. We have to stop this. So hopefully the Gen X and Gen Z can work together to sort of fix the problem.
It's interesting you say Gen X because I actually saw a little snippet on that, and Keith is in the gray area of the Gen X generations, and you're definitely there, Dr. Lopkin, that they grew up with the beginning of the Internet. They experienced both sides, and yes, Dr. Lopkin's actually right on this one without any question, as he always is, that they're the ones that are against the cancel culture, Mr. Reynolds. And having a unique experience of growing up on both sides.
Yeah, I got 1 foot in each, depending on who you say. I'm either a boomer or an X.
No, I think you're more Gen X. But anyway, yeah. But yeah, you grew up on both sides, and to some degree, I did at least experience both sides, and now it's kind of something that you took for granted is taken away. Free exchange of ideas.
Well, you have other things going on that could affect it too. You have the Republican Party is shrinking. It's I think a lot of the stuff that's going on in the media that we've talked about is last gasp efforts of a party that has a world view that's becoming less and less relevant in our country as the country becomes more diverse and accepting of people, versus trying to protect your turf. So I think that change has something to do with it. I also think that, things like the filibuster, as that unfolds, if that resolves differently, then we may have more ability to make laws, like bring back elements of the fairness doctrine. So, those are the kinds of things that could change the environment and help get us out of it.
Dr. Lopkin, final thoughts, as it should be.
Keith mentioned filibuster. I think it's important to remember the filibuster was put in place to guarantee that neither party pushed things through without the consent of the opposing party. It was meant to generate compromise. And that's what we need to get back to, is the ability to compromise and not go, it's my way or the highway.
Right.
Well, I thought it was a great show, gentlemen. And Dr. Lopkin, would you agree?
Absolutely. This was a great show. We are up against the final. So, Keith, you want to tell people a little bit about your business? If they want to get hold of you, how can they do that?
Yeah, I have a consulting company down in Stamford called Publio, and we help empower innovators seeking to build their influence in their space and differentiate themselves from the pack to grow their business. It's Publio. You can also search Keith Reynolds and the new content culture, and you'll find my book on Amazon. Thank you very much, guys. Always a pleasure.
Fantastic.
Yes, and
You've been listening to Carnivore Radio. You can catch us live here every Friday at 4 at blogtalkradio.com/Carnivore Radio. You can also hear the replay as well as our Carnivore Bites podcast every week at xvadio.com/podcast, as well as the Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts. We'll see you next week.